He returned from his trip without warning and found something strange inside his own home. What seemed like an ordinary routine hid a behavior he never imagined seeing. In just a few minutes, he realized he had ignored important signs for a long time. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. The city of Chicago was even grayer that Thursday afternoon, with low clouds heavy with a rain that stubbornly refused to fall. Robert Miller looked out the car window as the driver headed down Lakeshore Drive toward the Gold Coast. He had returned 3 days earlier than planned. The meeting in Los Angeles had ended sooner than expected, and for the first time in months, he felt a strange urge to be home. It wasn't exactly homesickness. It was something more undefined, a kind of weariness from the travels, the 5-star hotels that all began to look the same, and the business conversations that repeated themselves with only minor variations. Beatrice didn't know he was coming back. Robert had thought about calling, letting her know, but he decided it would be a pleasant surprise. After all, how long had it been since they had done something spontaneous? How long since they had surprised each other? Their 15-year marriage had settled into a routine as predictable as it was comfortable. Silent dinners, each on their own phone. Conversations about house renovations, social trips, calendar commitments, mechanical goodnight kisses. He worked too much, traveling constantly. She took care of the house with an almost obsessive dedication, ensuring everything was always impeccable. On the outside, they were the perfect couple. Charity events, photos on social media, the mansion in the Gold Coast decorated by an award-winning architect. On the inside, Robert felt a distance between them that neither dared to name. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. They simply existed in parallel like two polite inhabitants of the same luxurious house. The electronic gate opened, and the car pulled in slowly. Robert dismissed the driver, took his suitcase, and used his own key. He truly wanted to surprise Beatrice. Maybe that night they could have a real dinner together, talk, perhaps even rekindle something that had been dormant between them. The idea made him smile as he opened the front door. The house was silent. The air conditioning kept the temperature perfect, as always. The soft scent of lavender came from the diffusers scattered throughout the living room. Everything in its place, everything impeccable. Robert left his suitcase at the entrance and walked toward the back of the house where the service area and kitchen were located. It was then that he heard Beatrice's voice, in a tone he didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't the polite voice she used with her friends, nor the affectionate, though distant voice she used with him. It was a hard, cutting voice, loaded with something Robert couldn't quite define, whether it was anger or pleasure. He stopped in the hallway, still unseen. His heart began to beat faster, though he didn't know why. He approached slowly, and what he saw paralyzed him completely. Beatrice was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching Elena, the employee who had worked for them for nearly a year. Elena was kneeling on the floor, holding a cleaning cloth, her face turned toward the gleaming white porcelain tiles. But what froze Robert wasn't the scene itself. It was what had happened just before. He saw Beatrice take the recycling bin and, with a studied, deliberate motion, flip the contents onto the floor that was visibly clean. Papers, plastic packaging, and scraps of clean materials scattered across the white floor. Eleanor looked up for a second, surprised, but quickly lowered her head again. Beatrice's voice cut through the silence. "Look at what you've done, Elena. How can you be so careless? This floor was filthy. Clean it all again. And this time I want it actually clean, not the way you think clean is." Elena didn't respond. She just took the cloth and began to pick up the scattered trash, her shoulders tense, her breathing too controlled to be natural. Robert noticed something in her posture. It wasn't just obedience. It was fear. It was resignation. It was the posture of someone who had already learned that any word, any gesture, any attempt to defend herself would only make things worse. Robert felt something strange rise in his chest. It wasn't just indignation, it was shock. It was the feeling of seeing something that shouldn't exist, not there, not in the house he thought he knew. Beatrice continued speaking, now in an almost pedagogical tone, as if she were giving a lesson. "You need to understand that in this house everything has to be perfect. It's not a matter of being demanding. It's a matter of standards. If I don't hold you accountable, do you think you'll do it right? Look at this floor, look. Do you see? There's still a smudge there. Eleanor leaned in further, scrubbing the floor hard, her hands trembling slightly. Beatrice watched with her arms crossed, satisfied, as if this were just another normal afternoon of domestic supervision. That was when Robert took a step forward, and his presence was finally noticed. Beatrice turned, startled. Her face changed instantly. The hardness vanished, replaced by a surprised and joyful smile. "Robert, you're back. I wasn't expecting you until next week." He didn't smile back. He looked at her, then at Elena, who remained kneeling, now motionless, as if she didn't know whether to stand up or continue pretending she didn't exist. "What is going on here, Beatrice?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Beatrice blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I'm just supervising the cleaning." Elena was having trouble maintaining the standard I asked for. Robert looked at the gleaming floor. He looked at the scattered trash. He looked at Elena's expression, who finally raised her eyes to him for a second before lowering them again. "I saw you throw the trash on the floor, Beatrice." The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. Her face went through several expressions before settling on a defensive one. "Robert, you don't understand. It's hard to keep this house running perfectly. I have to be firm. If I'm not, nothing works." "Firm? You threw trash on a clean floor for her to clean it again. That's not firmness, Beatrice. That's something else." Beatrice took a step forward, her voice now louder, more urgent. "You aren't here. You travel all the time. Who is it that takes care of all this? Who ensures this house is always perfect for when you return? Me, and I do what I need to do to maintain the standard." Robert felt his anger rising, but he controlled his tone. He looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor, can you stand up, please?" Eleanor hesitated. She looked at Beatrice, then at Robert, and slowly stood up, her hand still clutching the cleaning cloth. Robert continued, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Eleanor, can you go rest for a bit? Go to your room, take some time. I need to talk to my wife." Elena nodded quickly, dropped the cloth in the sink, and left the kitchen, almost running, without looking back. Beatrice watched her leave with an expression that mixed irritation and something Robert couldn't identify. When they were alone, Beatrice tried again. "Robert, you're exaggerating. This is normal. I was just correcting poor work. I saw you throw the trash on the floor. The floor was clean." Beatrice looked away. She ran her hand through her hair, nervous. "You don't understand how hard it is. She doesn't do things the right way. I need to teach her. Teaching through humiliation? Creating work just for her to do it again? It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Beatrice didn't answer. She turned and left the kitchen, her high heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor of the living room. Robert stood there, looking at the impeccable floor where a few scraps of paper remained that Elena hadn't finished picking up. Something in that scene had shaken a structure he thought he knew. The perfect house, the polite marriage, the impeccable routine. Everything now seemed to have a shadow he had never noticed, or never wanted to notice. He went up to his office on the second floor. He closed the door. He sat in his leather chair and stared at the shelves full of books he never read, trophies of business achievements, framed photographs of him and Beatrice on trips, always smiling. For the first time in a long time, Robert felt he needed to understand what was really happening inside his own home, not just that afternoon, but for how long, with how many people, and more importantly, who his wife had become when he wasn't looking, and who he himself had become by choosing not to look. Night fell over Chicago. The city lights began to flicker on below, millions of lives happening in parallel. Inside that Gold Coast mansion, the silence was different. It was no longer the comfortable silence of routine. It was the heavy silence of truths that were beginning to crack the perfect surface. Robert knew he couldn't let this go. Not after seeing the expression on Elena's face. Not after realizing his wife was capable of doing that with such terrifying naturalness. Tomorrow he would start asking questions, and this time he wouldn't accept ready-made answers. Robert couldn't sleep that night. Beatrice had gone to their bedroom and closed the door without saying a word. He stayed in the office, looking at documents he couldn't read, thinking about the scene he had witnessed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's posture, cowering, resigned, too silent, mind. Dawn arrived slowly. When the sky began to brighten over Chicago, Robert went down to the kitchen. Elena was already there, preparing breakfast. She started when she saw him enter. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Sorry, I didn't know you were already up. I'll have breakfast ready in a moment. Elena, can you sit down for a minute? I need to talk to you. She hesitated, the fear visible in her brown eyes. She dried her hands on her apron and sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. Robert pulled up a chair and sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. Eleanor, what I saw yesterday, that wasn't the first time, was it? She lowered her eyes. It took her so long to respond that Robert thought she wouldn't say anything. But then, in a thin voice, she spoke. No, sir. How long has this been happening? Eleanor bit her lower lip, her hands squeezed tighter. When she spoke again, her voice was even lower, almost a whisper. Since I started working here. In the beginning it was different. Mrs. Miller was kind, she taught me how she liked things done. But after about 2 months it started to change. First it was small things. She'd ask me to clean a room, then come back and say it was wrong even when I was sure I'd done it right. Then she'd ask me to do it again. And again. Sometimes 3-4 times for the same spot. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. He kept his voice calm. And you never said anything? Eleanor raised her eyes to him, and there was so much in that look that Robert felt ashamed for even asking the question. She didn't need to answer with words. The answer was there, in the way she looked, in the fear that still inhabited her gestures, even at that moment. But she answered anyway. I need this job, Mr. Miller. I support my mother and my daughter. My mother has diabetes. She needs medicine every month. My daughter is 7. She's in school. The pay here is good. It's an official job with benefits. I couldn't afford to complain. So I just did what she told me. And I did it again and again. Her voice began to tremble. Robert saw she was fighting not to cry. There were days I cleaned the same room 5 times. Mrs. Miller would stand there watching, saying there was dust, that there was a smudge, that it wasn't the way she wanted it. But I knew there was nothing. The floor was shining. The furniture was perfect. But she made up flaws and I cleaned again because I couldn't lose my job. And yesterday? Throwing trash on a clean floor? Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, tears were trapped in her lashes. That started about 3 months ago. In the beginning, she just scattered small things. Crumbs she'd drop herself. Then it started to be more. Yesterday was the first time she threw the whole bin. I thought she was testing how much I could take. Robert felt the anger return, but he kept control. He needed to understand everything. Eleanor, do you eat properly here? She hesitated again. Robert noticed the pattern. Every question met resistance, as if Eleanor were so afraid to speak that she had to overcome an internal barrier with every answer. Mrs. Miller says I can't eat at the kitchen table. I have to eat in the staff room at the time she decides. 15 minutes for lunch, 10 for a snack. And she times it. If I take longer, she deducts it from my pay. Robert closed his eyes. How had he not seen any of this? How had he let this happen under his own roof? Eleanor continued, the words coming faster now as if she had held everything in for too long and needed to let go. There was a time I scrubbed the same bathroom 7 times in one day. 7. She kept finding things. She said there was hair in the drain, that the mirror was foggy, that the faucet had fingerprints. I cleaned everything so carefully, Mr. Miller, so carefully. But it was never good, never, and I started to think the problem was me, that I really wasn't good at this, that I was incompetent. The tears finally ran down her face. Elena wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, as if ashamed to show emotion. Sorry, Mr. Miller. I shouldn't be talking like this. No, you absolutely should. Continue, please. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. There was a day Mrs. Miller woke me up at 3 in the morning. She said she heard a noise in the kitchen and that I had to go down and check if everything was in order. I went down, checked everything. Nothing was out of place. But she insisted I clean the entire kitchen again at 3 in the morning. When I finished, it was almost 5. She came down, looked at everything, and said that now it was acceptable. Then she went back to her room. I didn't sleep anymore. I stayed up and started the day's work at 6, like always. Robert felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the woman sitting in front of him. Eleanor must have been about 35, but she looked older at that moment. Exhaustion was marked on her face, in her slumped shoulders, in the way she held onto the chair as if she were about to be dismissed at any second. "Elena, why did you never come to me to tell me this?" She looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and something like pity for him. "You were never here, Mr. Miller. And when you were, you only stayed for a few days. How was I going to tell you something like that? It would seem like gossip. It would seem like I was trying to cause trouble in your marriage. And in the end, who would they believe? Me or Mrs. Miller?" The truth of those words hit Robert like a punch. She was right, absolutely right. He had never been present enough to notice, and even if Elena had tried to tell him, he probably would have believed Beatrice. He would have thought it was an exaggeration, a misunderstanding, maybe even ingratitude. His silence had allowed all of this to happen. "Eleanor, you can go back to your room now, rest. You won't be working today, and I will ensure that none of this continues." She stood up, still insecure, still with fear in her eyes. "Am I going to be fired?" "No, you did nothing wrong. You were the victim here, Elena, not the guilty one." She nodded, but Robert saw she didn't completely believe him. How many times had she been blamed for things that weren't her fault? How many times had she heard that the problem was her, when the problem lay with the one humiliating her? When Elena left, Robert was alone in the kitchen. The sun had fully risen. Outside, Chicago was waking up. Cars, horns, the whole city in motion. Inside that silent house, Robert felt that something had broken irreparably. He went up to the office. He opened the computer and went straight to the household file folder. Beatrice was meticulous with everything, especially the management of the house. She had spreadsheets for everything: expenses, renovations, suppliers, and she also had a folder called Employees. Robert opened it. Inside were subfolders organized by year he began to explore. The pattern emerged too quickly to be a coincidence. In the last 5 years, 11 different employees had passed through the house. 11. Most had stayed between 3 and 8 months. Some less. One had left after only 6 weeks. Robert began to read the notes Beatrice had made in each file. Unsatisfactory work. Does not meet standards. Careless. Disorganized. Incapable of following simple instructions. Resigned without explanation. The more he read, the more his stomach turned. Beatrice had created a system. She documented every supposed error, every flaw, every inadequacy, but Robert now saw it with different eyes. Those notes weren't objective records of real problems. They were justifications. They were excuses for behavior that Beatrice knew was wrong, but felt she needed to rationalize. He found contact information. Some of the employees had left phone numbers. Robert wrote down the numbers. He didn't know yet what he would do with them, but he knew he needed to understand the scale of what had happened in that house. The office door opened. Beatrice walked in, already dressed for the day, makeup perfect, hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She looked at the computer, at the open files on the screen, and her face grew tense. "What are you doing?" "Trying to understand who you've become." The coldness in his voice made Beatrice stop in the middle of the room. She crossed her arms defensively. "You don't have the right to look through my files." "This is my house too, Beatrice, and these files concern people who worked for us, for me as well." He turned the computer screen so she could see. 11 employees in 5 years. 11, not one stayed more than a year. Most left in less than 6 months. Don't you find that strange? Beatrice lifted her chin proudly. "It's hard to find competent people these days. I have high standards. If they couldn't meet them, the problem was theirs, not mine. Or the problem was you making up flaws that didn't exist to justify treating them the way you treated Elena." Beatrice opened her mouth to respond, but Robert continued before she could speak. "I talked to Elena this morning. She told me everything. The repeated cleanings for no reason. The absurd rules about food. The late nights spent cleaning a kitchen that was already clean. And you know what shocked me most? It wasn't the cruelty of what you did. It was the naturalness with which you did it. As if it were normal. As if it were your right." Beatrice took a step forward, her voice rising. "It was my right. This house is my responsibility. You travel all the time, Robert. Who is here taking care of everything? Who ensures everything works perfectly? Me. And for that to work, I need to have authority." "Authority isn't humiliation, Beatrice." "You don't understand. Then explain it to me." Beatrice turned away, giving him her back. She stayed silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, more fragile. Do you think it's easy being left here alone while you build your empire out there? Do you think it's easy being the wife who only exists to take care of the house while you travel the world doing important business? She turned to face him, and Robert saw tears in her eyes. This house is the only thing I control, Robert. The only thing. And when people here don't do things the way I need them to, it's as if I'm losing even that. Robert remained silent, processing those words. There was pain there was loneliness, but that didn't justify anything she had done. It didn't erase the suffering she had caused. Beatrice, you turned your pain into cruelty, and that isn't right. She looked away. She left the office without saying another word. Robert heard her footsteps going down the stairs, heard the front door opening and closing, her car leaving the garage. He was alone again, looking at the computer screen where the names of the 11 employees were listed. 11 women who had passed through that house, 11 stories he didn't know, 11 versions of Elena, each carrying their own weight of silent humiliation. Robert knew what he had to do. It wasn't enough to stop it from continuing. It was necessary to acknowledge what had been done. It was necessary to look back and face the damage. He picked up the phone and began to dial the first number on the list. The first call was the hardest. Robert dialed the number 3 times before letting the call go through. On the other end, a female voice answered cautiously. Hello? Good morning. My name is Robert Miller. You worked at my house about 2 years ago. I'm calling because I need to talk about the time you spent working with us. There was a long silence. Robert almost thought she had hung up, but then she spoke, her voice tense. I'd prefer not to talk about that, sir. It's in the past. Let it be. I understand. But I need you to know that I found out what my wife was doing, and I want to apologize. Another silence. This time when she spoke again, there was something different in her tone. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was a mix of surprise and distrust. Do you really know? Do you know everything? I know she treated the employees cruelly, that she made up flaws, that she humiliated them, that she made the work impossible, and I know that happened to you too. The woman on the other end let out a shaky sigh. I thought it was me, that I was bad at what I did. I spent 6 months thinking I was worthless. Even today, when I start a new job, I'm afraid of making a mistake, of not being good enough, and I've worked as a housekeeper for 15 years. But those months in your house broke me in a way I'd never been broken before. Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. I'm so sorry, truly, I wasn't present. I didn't see what was happening, but that's no excuse. It was my house too, my responsibility too. The woman was silent for a moment. Then she said in a softer voice, Thank you for calling, Mr. Miller, honestly. I don't know if it changes anything, but it's good to know it wasn't me, that the problem wasn't me. When he hung up, Robert stared at the phone. The conversation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but he felt as if he had been carrying a weight for hours, and he still had 10 more names on the list. The second call was shorter. The woman on the other end thanked him politely but said she didn't want to dig up the past. Robert respected that. He noted that he had tried, that she had chosen not to speak, and moved to the next one. The third call was different. When Robert identified himself and explained the reason for the call, the woman on the other end began to cry. I thought no one was ever going to believe me. I thought I'd die carrying that alone. Please tell me, I want to listen. And she told him. She told him about the times Beatrice would wake her up in the middle of the night to redo work that was already perfect, about how she had developed insomnia because she was afraid of being woken up at any moment, about the day Beatrice threw away the food she had prepared for her own lunch, saying the smell was bothering her, about how she had lost nearly 20 pounds in 4 months because she spent more time cleaning than eating. I left because I couldn't take it anymore. I resigned without having another job lined up. My daughter was sick, I needed the money, but I preferred to risk it rather than stay one more day in that house. That's what she did to me, Mr. Miller. She made me choose between my mental health and my survival. Robert listened in silence, writing everything down. Every story was a mirror. Every account confirmed the pattern he had begun to see. These weren't isolated cases. They weren't misunderstandings. It was a system. a way of relating to the people who worked in that house that Beatrice had perfected over the years. Over the course of the day, Robert managed to speak with 6 of the 11 former employees. 2 didn't want to talk. 1 thanked him, but said she had moved on and didn't want to revisit the subject. 3 told stories that varied in detail, but converged on the essential. Beatrice made their work a systematic and silent hell. One of them, the youngest, was only 19 when she worked in the house. She stayed 2 months. She said she cried every night before bed, that she had developed stress-induced gastritis, that even now, 5 years later, she felt a tightness in her chest when she saw a house that was too large. The last conversation of the day was with an older woman who had worked in the house 3 years prior. She was direct. "Mr. Miller, I'll be honest. You calling now doesn't change what I went through. It doesn't take away the nights of sleep I lost. It doesn't erase the times I felt useless, but it shows that at least someone in that house had the decency to acknowledge it. And that, however small, means something. Means..." She paused and continued. "Your wife needs help, sir. I'm not saying this out of anger. I'm saying it because a person who does what she did isn't well. No healthy person treats another person that way." When Robert hung up the last call, it was already night. Beatrice had returned home a few hours earlier, but stayed locked in the bedroom. He had heard the muffled sound of crying, but he hadn't knocked on the door. Not yet. He needed to process everything he had heard first. He went down to the kitchen. Elena was there, preparing dinner even after he had told her to rest. She looked at him with a tired half-smile. "I can't stay still, Mr. Miller. I think too much." Robert understood. Work was control, it was predictability. It was a way not to sink into one's own thoughts. He sat at the table and watched Elena work. She moved with efficiency, but Robert now also saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she checked everything twice, 3 times, as if waiting for someone to appear and say it was wrong. "Eleanor, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, sir." "Why did you stay? The others left, some after only a few weeks. Why did you endure almost a year?" Elena stopped what she was doing. She leaned her hands on the sink and kept her back to him. "Because I didn't have a choice, Mr. Miller. The others could leave, find another job. I couldn't. My mother needs expensive medicine every month. My daughter is in private school because I want her to have opportunities I didn't have. The pay here is good. The benefits are there. If I left, how long would it take to find another place that paid the same? A month? 2? 3? And in the meantime, how would I pay the bills?" She turned to face him, and Robert saw tears in her eyes. "I stayed because I had to stay. Not because I wanted to. Not because everything was fine, but because sometimes we have to choose between dignity and survival. And I chose survival. I don't know if that makes me strong or weak. I only know it was the only choice I had." Robert stood up and walked over to her. "This won't happen anymore, Elena, you have my word." She nodded, but Robert saw the doubt in her eyes. How many empty promises had she heard in her life? How many times had someone said they would change and didn't? That night, Robert went up to the bedroom. Beatrice was lying there, awake, staring at the ceiling. When he entered, she didn't move. "I called the former employees today." Beatrice closed her eyes. "Why? Why dig into that?" "Because they deserve to know that someone acknowledged what happened, that someone saw." "And what did they say?" "They said you destroyed their confidence, that some developed health problems, that to this day they carry the marks of what you did." Beatrice turned her face to the wall. "I'm not a monster, Robert. No one said you are, but you did monstrous things." She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was broken. "I didn't want to be like this. I wasn't like this when we got married. Do you remember how I was?" "I remember." "And do you remember when you stopped seeing me?" Robert felt the blow. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her. "I worked too much. I traveled too much. I left you alone too much. You made me invisible, Robert. I took care of the house, organized everything, ensured your life ran perfectly when you returned. But you never saw, never acknowledged it, never said thank you. I was just part of the furniture, useful but invisible." Robert turned to look at her. Beatrice was crying, the tears streaming down her face without her making an effort to wipe them. "And then this house became the only thing I could control, the only place where I had power, where people had to listen to me, respect me, obey me. I know it's wrong. I've always known. but it was the only way I found to feel important again. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. There was truth in that. Painful, difficult, but truth. He had contributed to creating the void that Beatrice had tried to fill with control and cruelty. But that didn't erase what she had done. Beatrice, I understand your pain. I understand my part in this, but understanding isn't excusing. You hurt people, people who depended on you, people who didn't have the power to defend themselves. I know. And this needs to stop, truly. Not with empty promises, but with real changes. Beatrice nodded, still crying. I don't know how to fix this, Robert. I don't know how to go back. You can't go back, but you can move forward differently. He reached out his hand. Beatrice looked at it for a moment before taking it. Her fingers were cold, trembling. Let's get help, therapy for you, for us. And we are going to change how this house works, with clear rules, established boundaries, and respect. And if I can't do it? Then we'll find that out by trying, but not trying alone, trying with me. They stayed like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness of the bedroom, each carrying their own guilt, their own weight. Outside, Chicago remained alive, indifferent to the silent drama of that house in the Gold Coast. But inside that room something had changed. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. The recognition that both had failed, that both needed to change. And for the first time in a long time, they were willing to try together. The first appointment with the therapist happened on a Tuesday morning. Beatrice was visibly nervous, fidgeting with her hands during the entire drive to the office in the River North area. Robert drove in silence, respecting her nervousness. He himself didn't quite know what to expect. Dr. Helen Foster received them in a spacious room with large windows overlooking an internal garden. She was about 50, with graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and discreet glasses. There was nothing intimidating about her, but also nothing condescending, just a firm and attentive presence. In the first session, she made it clear that she wasn't there to judge, but she also wasn't there to comfort them with lies. The work would be hard. It would require honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to face uncomfortable things. Beatrice cried 3 times during that hour. Robert held her hand through some parts and let go through others when he realized she needed space. On the way back, they remained silent until they almost reached home. It was Beatrice who spoke first. She's right, you know. About me using control to compensate for the lack of control in other areas of my life. Robert nodded. But acknowledging it is only the first step. I know, and it's terrifying, Robert, because if I stop controlling, I don't know what's left of me. Maybe what's left is the person you were before you thought you needed to control everything. Beatrice looked out the window at the streets of Chicago passing by quickly. I don't know if I remember who I was. Then let's find out together. While Beatrice began the individual therapeutic process, Robert made practical decisions about the house. He called Elena for a serious conversation in the living room. Eleanor, I want you to take a paid leave of absence, 2 weeks, maybe 3, with full pay. Eleanor's eyes widened, startled. Did I do something wrong, sir? No, nothing. But this house needs to undergo changes, and I don't think it's fair for you to be here while we are still learning to do things differently. You deserve some time away, to rest, to think. And later, if you want to come back, you'll come back knowing exactly what the rules, the boundaries, and your rights are. Eleanor remained silent, processing. Robert continued, I'm going to deposit 3 months' salary in advance. It's not compensation for what you went through, because there is no possible compensation for that. But it's an acknowledgement, and a guarantee that you don't have to come back if you don't want to. You have the financial security to choose. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Miller, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. You just need to rest, take care of yourself, and then decide if you want to come back. Elena nodded, still not quite believing it. 3 days later, she left with a small suitcase, an impeccable letter of recommendation that Robert had personally written, and an envelope with the promised money. Before she left, she gave Robert a quick hug, a gesture that surprised them both. Thank you for seeing. That was all she said, but it was enough. With the house empty of employees, Robert and Beatrice found themselves forced to do things they had delegated for years. Cooking, cleaning, organizing. The first attempts were clumsy and almost comical. Robert burned scrambled eggs. Beatrice vacuumed the same room 3 times because she wasn't sure if she had done it right. But something happened in those days of the empty house. They began to talk, truly talk, not just exchange practical information about the day, but talk about how they felt, about fears, about regrets. One night, while washing dishes together after a simple dinner of pasta with tomato sauce, Beatrice said something that caught Robert by surprise. "I was jealous of them, you know." Of who? Of the housekeepers, of how they seemed so competent, so secure, as if they knew exactly what to do while I spent the whole day not knowing what my purpose was. Robert stopped drying the plate in his hand. "You turned jealousy into cruelty." "Yes, because it was easier to make them feel incompetent than to admit that I felt that way." Beatrice dropped the sponge and leaned her hands on the sink, her head down. "And the worst part is that the more I did it, the more I hated myself, but I couldn't stop. It became a cycle. I felt bad, so I controlled more. Then I felt worse, so I controlled even more." Robert approached and placed his hand on her shoulder. "That cycle is over, Beatrice. It's over because you are choosing to end it." She turned and hugged him, crying against his chest. Robert held her, feeling a mix of compassion, sadness, and something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. Real connection. Not the polite cordiality of the marriage they had built, but a true, raw, difficult emotional connection. The weeks passed. Beatrice continued in therapy twice a week. Robert reduced his travels to the absolute minimum. They also began couples therapy. In those sessions, themes they had avoided for years came to light. The emotional distance, the lack of intimacy, the marriage that had turned into a domestic partnership. In one of those sessions, Dr. Helen asked a direct question. "When was the last time you had a conversation where you felt truly seen by each other?" Robert and Beatrice looked at each other. Neither knew how to answer. The therapist continued, "You built a beautiful life on the outside, but you forgot to build a relationship on the inside. And when there is no relationship, only performance remains. Robert performs the role of the successful provider. Beatrice performs the role of the perfect domestic manager. But where are Robert and Beatrice, the people? With needs, fears, desires?" It was a question that echoed in the following days. Robert began to realize how much he had hidden behind work, how much he had used travels as an excuse not to face the coldness of the marriage. Beatrice began to see how much she had used the control of the house as a way to avoid her own emotional emptiness. One night, after a particularly difficult session, they decided to do something different. They took a bottle of wine, went out to the terrace of the house, and simply talked. No agenda, no objective, just talking. Robert told her about the pressure he felt to keep the company growing, the loneliness of the travels, the fear of failing. Beatrice told him about how she had lost herself in the marriage, about the dreams she had abandoned when they married, about the frustrated artist who lived inside her and whom she had silenced. "You used to paint," Robert remembered, surprised. "I had forgotten that." "I had forgotten too, or pretended I had." "Why did you stop?" "Because when we got married, I thought my role was to take care of the house, support you, be the perfect wife. And painting didn't fit into that." "Who said it didn't fit?" Beatrice was silent for a moment. "I think no one said it. I just assumed. And then it became easier not to paint than to face the fact that I had chosen wrong." "And if you went back to painting?" Beatrice looked at him surprised. "Now? Why not?" "Because I don't know if I still know how. Because I'm afraid of having lost that too. Or because you're afraid of discovering that you still know how, and having to admit all the years you wasted." The truth of those words hit Beatrice like a slap, but not a cruel slap. A slap that wakes one up. She held Robert's hand and squeezed it. "I'm so sorry, Robert, for everything, for becoming that person, for hurting so many people, for letting our marriage turn into this. I'm sorry too for leaving you alone, for not seeing, for being a silent accomplice." They stayed like that, holding hands, looking at the illuminated city below, and for the first time in years, Robert felt he was truly beside his wife, not just sharing the same space, but sharing the same moment. In the following days, something began to change in the dynamic between them. Small things. Robert began to ask how Beatrice's day had been, and actually wait for the answer. Beatrice began to ask questions about his work that went beyond the superficial. They began to cook together, not out of necessity but because they discovered they enjoyed it. They laughed for the first time in months when Robert dropped an entire bag of flour on the floor. Intimacy also returned, but it was different. It wasn't the mechanical intimacy of before. It was something slower, more conscious. A longer kiss, a hug that didn't end quickly, a night where they simply stayed up talking until they fell asleep, entwined. 2 weeks later, Eleanor called. She said she was ready to talk about a possible return. Robert and Beatrice invited her for coffee in a neutral place, a bakery in her neighborhood. Eleanor arrived with a different posture, straighter, more secure. The three of them sat at a table in the back. Eleanor was direct. I thought a lot during these weeks about whether I want to come back or not, and I decided I do, but with conditions. Robert nodded. Go ahead. Elena took a piece of paper from her pocket. She had written a list. I want a contract with fixed hours. In at 8, out at 5, 1 hour for lunch, not 15 minutes. I want all the rules written down and clear. I want to know exactly what is expected of me. And I want it so that if there is a problem, it's talked about, not used against me. She looked at Beatrice firm. And I want respect, Mrs. Miller. Real respect. At the first sign that things are going back to the way they were, I'm leaving. And this time it's not because I have to stay. It's because I choose to stay as long as it's good for me. Beatrice held back tears and nodded. You deserve all of that, Elena. And more. I have no excuse for what I did. I only have the promise that I'm trying to be different. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then let's try. They shook hands. Robert felt an enormous relief. It wasn't complete redemption, but it was a step. A real, concrete step towards something better. When they returned home, Beatrice stood in the living room looking around. The house was still beautiful, but now she saw it with different eyes. It was no longer the only place where she had power. It was just a house, a home. And that was enough. Robert approached and hugged her from behind. It's going to work, he said. Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder. I hope so, because I never want to be that person again. You won't be, not if we stay vigilant. And they stayed like that, hugging in the middle of the room while Chicago followed its rhythm outside. Two imperfect people trying to build something better on the ruins of what they had allowed themselves to become. Elena's first day back was tense. She arrived at 8 sharp, as agreed in the new contract Robert had insisted on drafting personally. Beatrice was in the kitchen when Elena walked in, and for a moment the two simply looked at each other. Elena, firm but cautious. Beatrice, nervous but determined. Good morning, Elena. Good morning, Mrs. Miller. I made coffee. Do you want a cup before starting? Elena blinked, surprised. In nearly a year of working there, Beatrice had never offered her coffee. She had never invited her for anything. I do, yes, thank you. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Elena could barely sit before. They drank coffee in silence initially, then Beatrice began to speak. Eleanor, I know I apologized before, but I want to apologize again, truly, looking at you. What I did was cruel. There's no other word, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope you give me the chance to show that I can be different. Eleanor held the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth. I accept your apology, Mrs. Miller, and I'm here because I believe people can change. But I'm also here because now I know I can leave if things go back to how they were. And that changes everything. Beatrice nodded, understanding. The balance of power had shifted. Elena was no longer trapped by fear. She was there by choice, and that meant Beatrice would need to deserve that choice every day. The first weeks were a constant exercise in relearning. Beatrice had to police herself all the time. There were moments when she almost slipped, moments when the old habit tried to resurface. One morning, 3 days after Elena's return, Beatrice walked into the living room and saw a pillow out of place. The impulse was immediate. Call Elena, ask her to fix it, maybe even make a comment about carelessness. But she stopped. She took a deep breath. She picked up the pillow and fixed it herself. When Robert came home that night, Beatrice told him about the episode. He noticed how proud she was of herself for something so small. But it wasn't small. It was huge. It was a victory against years of conditioning. "You're doing well," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'm trying. Every day is a try." There was another moment 2 weeks later that was harder. Eleanor had forgotten to turn off the coffee maker. Beatrice saw it, and the anger rose instantly. That kind of mistake was exactly what she used to use as ammunition for hours of humiliation. She felt the words forming in her mouth, hard, cutting. But then she remembered the therapy sessions. She remembered Dr. Helen saying that anger is often fear in disguise, and she asked herself, what exactly was she afraid of? A fire? No. The house was safe. It was fear of losing control. Fear that if she didn't react with harshness, everything would crumble. She breathed, counted to 10, went to the kitchen where Elena was organizing the pantry. "Eleanor, the coffee maker was left on. Can you turn it off when you finish there?" Eleanor turned, startled, already expecting a scolding. But she saw only Beatrice standing in the doorway, with an expression that was tired but not angry. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller, I'll turn it off now." "No problem, it happens." And Beatrice left. She went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and cried. She cried because it had been hard. She cried because she still felt the anger wanting to come out. She cried because change was exhausting. But she also cried because she had succeeded. She had chosen differently. When Robert returned from work, she told him. He hugged her tight. "I'm proud of you." "It was so hard, Robert. You don't imagine how hard it was not to yell at her." "But you didn't yell, that's what matters." Beatrice leaned her head on his chest. "Sometimes I'm afraid I won't be able to do it. That one day I'll go back to how I was." "You won't. Not if you stay vigilant, not if you keep choosing differently every day." And he was right. As the weeks passed, it became a bit easier. Not easy, but less exhausting. Beatrice began to realize that the world didn't fall apart if a pillow was crooked, if a plate had a small smudge, if Elena made a small mistake. The house remained standing, and more importantly, the people inside it began to breathe better. Elena, for her part, was also changing. Not going back to how she was before working there, because that Elena had been modified by the experience, but becoming a stronger version. She spoke more. When she had a doubt about a task, she asked directly, instead of guessing and praying she was right. When she needed to leave earlier for some reason, she gave notice in advance, and without fear. And when Beatrice praised a job well done, she accepted the praise with a simple thank you, without suspicion. One afternoon, Elena was cleaning the living room windows when Beatrice walked in carrying a canvas, brushes, and paints. Elena stopped, curious. "Are you painting again, ma'am?" Beatrice seemed almost embarrassed. "I'm trying. It's been years since I picked up a brush. But my therapist said I should reconnect with the things that made me happy before I lost myself." "Can I see?" Beatrice hesitated, then turned the canvas. It was a sketch, still loose strokes of a city landscape. Chicago seen from above, with all its buildings and organized chaos. "It's beautiful," Elena said sincerely. "It's a mess," Beatrice laughed, but it was a light laugh without bitterness. "But it will get better, I hope." "It will." And there was something in that simple exchange, in that small moment of two women talking about art, in a sunlit room in a house in Chicago, that showed how much things had truly changed. Robert was also changing. He had reduced travels to the strictly necessary. He delegated more at the office. He came home earlier and didn't open his laptop after dinner. Some nights he and Beatrice simply watched a movie, or talked on the terrace, or cooked together. They had even started going out more. Dinners at restaurants where they truly talked. A play Beatrice had wanted to see for months. An art exhibition where she stayed for almost 2 hours, observing each painting, while Robert patiently accompanied her, learning to see through her eyes. The intimacy between them had gained new layers. It wasn't just physical, though, that had also improved. It was an emotional intimacy they hadn't had in years. Robert now knew Beatrice's fears, her abandoned dreams, her insecurities. Beatrice knew the pressures Robert carried, the loneliness he felt even surrounded by people, the fear of failing that moved him, and at the same time imprisoned him. One Saturday night, while Robert was preparing dinner and Beatrice was setting the table, she stopped and looked around. The house was different, not in the decor, not in the furniture, but in the energy. There was lightness, there was laughter, there was peace. "Robert, Can we invite Elena to have dinner with us? Robert dropped the spoon he was using and looked at her, surprised. Really? I think so. She's part of this house now, and I want her to know she's welcome, not just as an employee, as a person. Robert smiled with that smile Beatrice hadn't seen in years, a genuine smile full of pride and affection. I'll call her. Elena was even more surprised than Robert. She hesitated, said she didn't want to intrude, but Robert insisted. And there the three of them had dinner together for the first time. The conversation was a bit awkward at first. No one knew quite what to say, but gradually it flowed. Elena told them about her daughter, about how she was doing well in school. Robert told a funny story about a disastrous meeting. Beatrice talked about a canvas she was painting, inspired by an old photo of her grandmother. It wasn't a perfect meal. There were silences. There were uncomfortable moments. But there was also humanity. Three people sitting at the same table, not separated by rigid hierarchies, but connected by the shared experience of trying to be better. When Elena stood up to leave at the end of the night, Beatrice walked her to the door. Thank you for staying, Elena, for giving me this chance. Elena looked at her, and there was something gentle in her gaze. Thank you for changing, Mrs. Miller. They didn't hug, not yet. But there was respect there was mutual recognition. And that, at that moment, was more than enough. In the following weeks, the routine solidified. Elena worked her 8 hours, had her full lunch, received praise when she did something well, and respectful conversations when something needed adjusting. Beatrice continued in therapy, painted almost every day, and constantly fought the old impulses that sometimes still appeared. Robert was present, participative, attentive not only to signs of Beatrice's relapse, but also to his own behavior, to his own tendency to distance himself when things got difficult. There was one day Beatrice slipped for real. Elena had accidentally broken a cup. It was an expensive cup from a set Beatrice loved. The anger came strong, and before she could control herself, she spoke in a harsh tone. How can you be so clumsy? The silence that followed was heavy. Elena stood still, holding the shards. Robert, who was in the next room, heard it. But then something happened. Beatrice stopped. She looked at Elena. She saw the fear returning to her eyes. She saw her posture curving again, and she felt a wave of disgust at herself. I'm sorry, Elena. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken like that. It was an accident. Accidents happen. Elena looked at her, surprised. Beatrice knelt down and began to help pick up the shards. Forget the cup. Are you okay? You didn't cut yourself? No, I'm fine. Beatrice threw the shards in the trash and looked at Elena. I slipped. I spoke the wrong way. But I want you to know I realized it, and I'm not going to let that become the pattern again. Elena nodded, still processing. Robert appeared in the doorway, and Beatrice looked at him. There was shame in her look, but also determination. I'm going to make it, she said, more to herself than to him. I'm going to be different. And everyone believed her, because she already was. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And that was the difference that mattered. That night, Robert and Beatrice stayed up late, talking about the incident with the cup, about how change was a process, not an event, about how there would be difficult days, relapses, moments of weakness, but also about how every time Beatrice chose differently, it became a bit easier to choose differently the next time. We're going to make it, Robert said, holding her hand in the darkness of the bedroom. Beatrice squeezed back. We are making it. 6 months after that afternoon, when Robert had returned from his trip without warning, the mansion in the Gold Coast remained impeccable. The windows shone under the Chicago sun. The gardens were well tended, the furniture in its place. On the outside, nothing had changed, but on the inside, everything was different. One Saturday morning, Robert woke up early and went down to the kitchen. He found Beatrice already awake, drinking coffee while flipping through an art exhibition catalogue. She had started visiting galleries, thinking perhaps of exhibiting her own work. The idea still scared her, but it was a different fear, not the paralyzing fear of before. It was the fear that comes with new possibilities. Good morning, she said, smiling when she saw him. Good morning. Have you been up long? Half an hour. I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the exhibition tonight. Beatrice had finally agreed to show some of her paintings in a group exhibition of local artists. Robert knew how important that was for her. It was a way to reconnect with the person she had been before losing herself in the role of the perfect wife of an impeccable house. "It's going to be great," he said, kissing her forehead. Eleanor arrived a few minutes later. She entered through the back door, as always, but now there was lightness in her steps. She changed clothes, tied her hair back, and went to the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller." "Good morning, Elena. Coffee?" "I already had some at home, thank you. But I'll take a glass of juice if there is any." Beatrice served the juice, and the three of them stood talking for a few minutes. About the week that had passed, about the plans for the weekend, about Elena's daughter who had gotten a good grade on an important test. It was such a simple scene, so normal, that someone looking from the outside would never imagine the painful path they had traveled to get there. Throughout that day, Robert observed the dynamics of the house. He observed Beatrice interacting with Eleanor. There was a moment when Eleanor asked if she could change the arrangement of some objects in the living room to make cleaning easier. Beatrice thought for a moment, then said yes, that it made sense. In the past, such a question would have been received as an insult. Now it was just collaboration. Later, Beatrice made a small slip. Eleanor was reorganizing the pantry, and Beatrice passed by, saw something out of the pattern she had in her head, and opened her mouth to correct her. But she stopped. She breathed. She closed her mouth. And she left. Robert saw it all from a distance and felt proud. Not pride because she was perfect, but because she was trying. Every day. Every moment. In the afternoon, while Beatrice was getting ready for the exhibition, Robert went up to the office. He looked at the files he had opened months ago. The names of the 11 employees were still there. He had managed to speak with 9 of them. 2 never called back. Of the 9, 3 had accepted the apology with some reservation, 5 with more openness, and 1 had said she didn't want any further contact. Robert respected all the responses. The important thing wasn't the forgiveness, it was the acknowledgement. It was looking at what had been done and not pretending it didn't exist. He closed the laptop and went downstairs. Beatrice looked beautiful in a dark blue dress and her hair down. She was nervous. Robert could tell by her small gestures, her hands fidgeting with her purse, her eyes checking everything more than once. "Are you ready?" "I think so. I don't think I'll ever be completely ready, but it's time." They said goodbye to Elena, who would stay later that Saturday because she had offered to make a special dinner for when they returned. It was something she wasn't obligated to do, but she had offered, and Beatrice had accepted with sincere gratitude. The exhibition was in a cultural space in Wicker Park, small, intimate, with white walls and soft lighting. There were about 15 artists exhibiting. Beatrice had 3 canvases. One was the urban landscape of Chicago she had started months ago. Another was an abstract portrait Robert didn't quite know how to interpret, but it touched him in some way. The third was the most personal, a woman looking into a mirror, but the reflection showed someone different, freer, more whole. Robert stood before that third canvas for a long time. He understood it was Beatrice painting herself, the Beatrice she had been and the Beatrice she was becoming. It wasn't a complete transformation, it wasn't magic, it was a process, it was daily effort. A few people approached to talk to Beatrice about the works. She was shy at first, but gradually she opened up, talking about her inspirations, about the return to painting after years away. Robert observed from a distance, seeing his wife shine in a way he hadn't seen in so long. And he realized he had missed that, missed seeing her like that, whole, not just performing a role. On the way back home, they talked about the night, about the people Beatrice had met, about a possible sale of one of the canvases. But at a certain point, Beatrice fell silent, looking out the car window at the streets of Chicago passing by. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how I almost destroyed everything, how I almost destroyed myself, you, Eleanor, all those women, because of a void I didn't know how to fill." Robert took her hand. "But you didn't destroy it, you stopped, you changed." "I changed because you came back that day. If you hadn't seen, if I had continued, where would I be now?" "There's no way to know, but I know where you are now. You're here, you're trying, you're being different." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "I'm afraid, you know. Afraid of going back to who I was, afraid that one day I'll wake up and the monster will be back. You won't let that happen, and I won't let it either. We watch over it together." When they arrived home, the smell of food greeted them. Eleanor had prepared a lasagna, her specialty that Robert and Beatrice had discovered in one of their conversations at the table. The three of them had dinner together again, and this time the conversation flowed more naturally. They laughed at silly stories, talked about plans for the future, shared the dessert Elena had made. When Elena left, it was already late. Robert and Beatrice were alone in the living room. They sat on the sofa side by side in comfortable silence. Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing, for staying." Robert kissed the top of her head. "We're a team, Beatrice. We always were. We just forgot it." They stayed like that for a long time, just feeling each other's presence. Outside, Chicago remained awake, millions of lives happening simultaneously. Inside that house, two imperfect people had found a way back to each other. It wasn't an easy path. It wasn't a path without obstacles. But it was a path they had chosen to walk together. In the following months, the routine continued. Beatrice painting, going to therapy, fighting old impulses and choosing differently most of the time. Robert present, attentive, participative, but also taking care of himself, of his own limits, of his own balance between work and personal life. Elena working with dignity, being respected, being able to be herself without fear. There were difficult days. There was one week Beatrice relapsed more times, became irritated, impatient. Robert noticed she was exhausted, suggested she take a few days just to rest, paint, not think about the house. Beatrice resisted at first, but ended up accepting. She spent 3 days at a resort in the countryside alone, painting and processing. She came back renewed. There was another time Robert traveled for a week for work, and Beatrice felt the old pattern wanting to return. The impulse to control everything in his absence, to tighten the grip. But she called the therapist, had an extra session, talked to Elena about what she was feeling. And she managed to get through that week without causing damage. A year after that afternoon that had changed everything, Robert was in the office when he received a call. It was one of the former employees, the one who had worked in the house 2 years prior, and with whom he had spoken at the very beginning. She said she had thought a lot and wanted to talk in person if possible. Robert scheduled a coffee. When they met, the woman was direct. "I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Miller, for calling, for acknowledging it. That changed something in me. I spent years thinking I was worthless, that I was incompetent. But when you called and said the problem wasn't me, it was as if a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was able to go back to work with confidence. I'm in a good job now with people who respect me. And I don't think I would have managed that if you hadn't done what you did." Robert felt his eyes well up. "I'm the one who thanks you for answering that day, for giving me the chance to acknowledge the error." She smiled, said goodbye, and left. Robert sat in the coffee shop for a few more minutes processing that conversation. What they had done didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the harm caused, but it created a different path for the future. And that, he was learning, was all one could do. Acknowledge, repair, change, and stay vigilant not to repeat it. That night at home, Robert told Beatrice about the meeting. She cried. She cried with relief, with gratitude, with shame still present, but less suffocating. Robert hugged her, and they stayed like that, entwined on the sofa as night fell over Chicago. The mansion in the Gold Coast remained beautiful. The paintings on the walls, the designer furniture, the well-tended gardens. But the true beauty was no longer just in the things. It was in the people, in the way they treated each other, in the respect they had built, in the dignity that everyone there could have. Elena continued working, but now she knew she could leave at any moment if she wanted to, and it was precisely because she knew she could leave that she chose to stay. Beatrice continued fighting her internal demons, but now with tools, with support, with awareness. Robert continued building his business empire, but he had learned that success out there meant nothing if the house was empty of love, respect, and presence. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real, it was honest, it was human. And in that house where before only the appearance of perfection lived, now lived something much more valuable. Conscious imperfection, daily effort, the constant choice to be better, the necessary vigilance not to let the past repeat itself. Robert looked around the room. He saw one of Beatrice's paintings on the wall, saw the pillow a bit crooked that no one had rushed to fix, saw through the window Elena watering the plants in the garden while humming softly. He saw life happening, not the perfect life, the real life, and it was more than enough. It was everything. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Beatrice, and Elena has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, of acknowledging mistakes, and the sincere search for change, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Was it Robert's courage to see the truth? Was it Beatrice's struggle against her own demons? Was it Elena's dignity in establishing